Thank you for the introduction, and definitely thank you for Sam to organize this event as such. It's very timely, I guess, and very fruitful to have discussion of the type that we've had from the morning. And I'll try to be very brief and more reflective, I guess, of what has been said already throughout the day, and to have a bit of a synopsis or summarize that could be reflective of what could be our outlook for the future when we speak about the trilateral relationship, which is properly defined, as we can say, a strategic partnership or alliance, which could be used as synonyms depending on the context that we speak about, obviously. So we've heard very frequently today the words such as interdependence, shared values, shared history, affinity, and then destiny for the future. And obviously those are the words that are very much reflective and mirroring an actual development historically and in current times as well about the relationship of the three countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. And then that is the strongest foundation one can think of, obviously, when we speak about what could be the potential for the trilateral relationship of the type that has been very fruitfully developing for the last not only 20 years, but then we've had historically much longer period of time of fruitful coexistence and brotherly relations. Speaking about the future, I think it is very important when we speak at this juncture of the history to have an overview of a larger geopolitical context in which the development of our relationships is happening, and that could be very insightful for us to come up with ideas, opinions, recommendations for the future potential of deepened relationship between the three countries. So we see the changing world, obviously, in many ways, and then when we speak about the interests of the countries that we represent and then the region in overall, we see that traditional concepts in the way that we've had an understanding of that after the dissolution of the Soviet Union are moving. We see the US being more inward-looking rather than having an appetite for global leadership. That's all could be temporal, but then for the time being, that's an issue one needs to take into consideration. U.S. is becoming, in the nearest future, energy independent. That obviously there are many understandings and opinions how much that could have its own implication for the Middle East as a region. And actually, Middle East is another region which is, for some of us, not only a neighboring region, but then the region they belong partially to. But then developments in that region have a great implication, obviously, as I believe, for the future of our own region as well. We see the different dynamics with relation to Iran, and then based on the developments in that direction, we could see changes in geopolitical architecture of a larger region that we belong to. We see Europe still stuck with comprehending what could be the future of Europe, having more of an appetite for growth and more integration, or again having more concentration on the internal problems in the way that Europe could become stronger from inside without becoming stronger from outside. And then getting bigger in terms of the affinity of shared values and principles in the larger neighborhood rather than Europe necessarily when we speak about the European Union itself. And then the big issue that is part of a larger geopolitical context in which we find ourselves in our part of the world, that's a very strong drive and motivation of Russia to form Eurasian Union, which in many ways could be seen as a modernized version of a reincarnated Soviet Union. Not direct analogy, but then the direct analogy applies to one fundamental notion I think is relevant when we speak about the Eurasian Union. It's isolationism with relation to the rest of the world for those who are under the power of Russia in that type of the union, rather than connectivity with the rest of the world when you find yourself stronger if you are more competitive and you are more plugged into the global relations and global markets. So basically for those who are voluntarily or forced to make choice of belonging or destiny in the future. I mean here countries of the post-Soviet Union, because obviously Turkey is not prone to that type of the challenge. That's a fundamental challenge of what the future holds for us. It's the future where we are fully part of international relations as the sovereign nations, or we're again part of a big conglomerate where we don't decide for ourselves. We're isolated in terms of the sovereign capacity of making decision-making and economic, by the way, decision-makings as well, and or we are again full-fledged members of international community. So those are the fundamental issues one needs to have in the back of the mind when we think of what could be the future of trilateral strategic partnership and alliance between Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. And here again, the interdependence and affinity historically and in the current times developed credibility of the relationships is a very good foundation for solid future of the trilateral relationships. Because here we speak about the merged interests, affinity of the interests for the future, shared values and principles when it comes to the sovereignty, independence, and then no desire of infringing upon the sovereignty of each other, and basic understanding that by standing together and defending common interest in a coordinated way, we basically serve ourselves in the best way. And the past 20 years in overall a very good example of that. But why we could be in a routine way of development of this process, but rather historic juncture, I believe, is that we need to be very strategic because of all the reasons that I've outlined in the beginning of how we redefine the region, basically, or how we rebrand it. Because so far, when we speak about Georgia and Azerbaijan, we're still stuck with the notion of South Caucasus. And I want to take it right from my side. It's not that Georgia or myself personally, we don't see ourselves part of South Caucasus. But then if we speak about, in terminology of geopolitics, South Caucasus is not working as a region for obvious reasons to this audience I don't need to be explaining right now. And this is a big weakness for us, because what matters in modern world, as much as it mattered always, I guess, historically, is relevance. So for the small countries like Georgia and Azerbaijan, it is very important to have a role of a contributor to the bigger issues in international relations, where you can be relevant, basically, and then where you can breed an added value of the type that would encourage to have constructive interest to the region. And we've seen for the past time that some of that is fading due to, again, multiplicity of the reasons I spoke partially again in the beginning. So by creating a new rebranded narrative for the region, we are highly increasing potential for being more integrated with the world economy and being more integrated with the global political relations. So it's very hard to come up with a concrete recipe, obviously, of what that brand as a title could hold, but then Trabzon Declaration is a very good beginning for that, because that brings an impetus in a different institutionalized way when we speak about the diplomatic institutionalization, not as an organizational development of the trilateral relationships. And frankly, I don't believe that we are at the stage where we need a separate organization for that. What we need is a very close coordination, diplomatic close coordination on trilateral level that brings impetus to the sectoral coordination of the type that really develops different trilateral relationships in a more solid and sustainable way. So the beginning and impetus for that from the Trabzon is very good. It was very timely, it was very coherent and comprehensive in terms of the start up to that process, and I guess subsequent meetings that have happened, one meeting and then the process in the way it continues, gives reason for optimism for that, so that there is a good beginning there and then good continuation. So what could be the elements for the trilateral relations at a strategic level that could be decisive, so that we bring that relevance to our relationship for a global audience in that sense? Obviously, economy is a big one, and we've spoken about that some time ago in a different panel. So it's creating our region in a new rebranded way as a hub for financial, transportation and energy type of connectivity between East and West. And here we can say that we've been already working for that for quite some time, but then we've never worked on that in a coordinated manner, frankly. So Georgia was doing its own way of promoting that idea. Azerbaijan, Turkey, to the smallest degree, I would say as well, because Turkey has big issues on the agenda as well when you speak about the foreign policy. So what we need right now to have a united front, basically, in a coordinated message box type of way of knowing how we promote that notion, how we work together and enrich our diplomatic and all the resources that we can have in such a way that we actually create that notion in a well-settled way outside of our region, that yes, that's a phenomenon that already exists, works, and have a great potential for the future. So that we reach a greater audience for that, but in a very solid way. And I think a lot of things could be done in that direction, but then definitely trinity of the action relation in that sense should be very well established. Security and stability, and then we've briefly talked about Afghanistan 2014, but then it's beyond that. I mean, what could be the trilateral partnership of Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Georgia for the rest of the world? It merits consideration, because we could bring a significant added value to stabilization of a greater region in which we are if we have interoperability of our forces, exercises in the way we might be doing that together. Some might not like that, some might like that when we speak about the bigger region, but ultimately us being stable, more secure, and then cooperating on the issues that are of common importance is of added value to the greater stability of the region, especially in all the unknowns that Afghanistan brings to our part of the world after 2014. And frankly, it's not only Afghanistan, obviously, in that sense, but then there are many other hotspots, but that's the closest. And then that is very much relevant to the Central Asia as such, and connectivity with that, and interest of keeping Central Asia, not only Caucasus, open to the rest of the world, for that not to be subsumed with the uncertainties of post-2014 in Afghanistan and being isolated within the Eurasian Union. So basically, trilateral relationship of Turkey, Georgia, and Azerbaijan maintains an open gateway not only to Caucasus as such, to the region, but the whole Caspian in that sense. So enlargement of the definition of what is the region that is directly benefiting from this relationship is much larger than Caucasus. That is why one can name that it's, again, ambition of Georgian being bigger than Georgia is, but we're bigger than South Caucasus, frankly, my friends, and then we need to be developing that brand in the way that we're not circumscribed with the dimensions of the Caucasus when we speak about the importance of our trilateral relationships in that sense. And then general affinity of the values and principles when we speak about the three countries is very coherent. I mean, we've had some questions about, and then issues that we've discussed about Georgia being a front runner when it comes to the, in post-Soviet space, one of the front runners when it comes to the deeper integration into the EU, and it's no secret that we wish to be members of the EU whenever there will be potential for that. But in the meantime, we want to be as closely associated as possible. Turkey is a candidate country. We are one of the biggest cheerleaders for Turkey to become full-fledged member, and then as much as, again, we could be of support to each other in our directions, I guess it's mutually beneficial. And Azerbaijan has a very well understood and very pragmatic way of seeing how integration with the EU should be construed. It's a sovereign-to-sovereign relationship, basically, with the EU and then Azerbaijan being committed to the energy security of EU at the expense of its own security at times, because Russia, for obvious reason, doesn't really like in the way how Azerbaijan is committed to that cause, but that's a sovereign decision of Azerbaijan that is very much appreciated, not only in Georgia, but I would hope in most of the capitals of the EU. But again, diversity of us, of what we want in terms of the institutional destiny for the future, doesn't make any problem of how much we could actually benefit with each other's progress in the way that we all want to have progress with relation to the EU. Because if Georgia becomes member of the European Union, that's no challenge in any ways to Azerbaijan. It's rather benefit, obviously, because then we enlarge the European presence in the region in a way that, if we speak about Russia with its conflicting aim of creating Eurasian Union, we are all better off to have the freedom, space of a freedom, basically, when it comes to what we want to decide and act upon in that sense. So divergence of national agendas with relation to the EU does not make too much of a difference in my understanding when we speak how much we all look to the free space of Euro-Atlantic dimension, rather than we wouldn't want to exclude ourselves from it. And frankly, it's very unfortunate that this issue has become as a zero-sum game, really, because if Russia would have had a pragmatic view of what Russia's position towards that could have been, then it would be having a win-win situation, because logically that should have been. But due to the vision of the Russian political elite as of now, it's not working in that way. So unfortunately, we're forced in this situation when it's very hard to balance, and at times you have to make hard decisions in the way that could be very uncomforting when it comes to day-to-day life of the country in the way you run for that. And a few remarks on Armenia. When we speak about the trilateral relationships of the type that we're developing, I guess that we all don't mean that this is the closing of the door for indefinite time for Armenia. I mean, no. I mean, if we develop the economy in the way that we develop and trilateral relationships, when time comes, and if that time comes, Armenia joining that discourse would only benefit not only Armenia, but then would strengthen the regional brand of the whole region. But by not being willing to do so now, which should not imperil us, obviously, of going further in this direction. And there are obviously nuances from the diplomatic point of view that we all have to take into account, but then I think that it's well understood in Yerevan as well that there is a lot of pragmatism when we speak about economic developments in our region, in the way that this develops between the three of us in that dimension. And finally, on the multi-layered approach to the strategic relations that we should be approaching, I agree that for a long period of time we have taken it as granted that we have very solid relationships, that it's there, it's sustainable, and there's no challenge to that. And there was a very little attention that has been paid to the social strata or social fabric of three of us in such a way that we would make these relations sustainable for a mid-term, long-term perspective in a way that there would be no challenges to that. And we see in Georgia that could be different from country to country, obviously, but then we see new organizations that are developing right now in Georgia that have this Eurasian platform being its motto, basically. I can't speak in terms of an evidence from where their money come from, but they definitely have very much pro-Russian angle into that. So it's a classical way that we see in some other post-Soviet countries as well, how Russia tries to work on the social, on the public perception, basically, so that reorientation of the political discourse is somehow pushed by the public changing its mood. It's a very difficult task to do for Russia, obviously, in our countries and in Georgia as well, but they make an effort. So I think it's a lesson one needs to learn, how much we need to be more vigilant in terms of connecting our societies to each other so that they have a better understanding how interdependent we are, but then how mutually benefiting we are. Not to take for granted that we know about each other. I mean, I'm still from the generation where these connections are very strong, but then if we take the younger generation in the 20s, they travel to the rest of the world more rather than among our countries. So as much as we could develop more different connections between different stakeholders, economy it be students, it be think tankers, you just name it, culture, it's all for the benefit of the sustainability of the relationships that we need to have, because ultimately if we speak about 2020, 2030, I understand that we're not very good at planning, perhaps sometimes in our part of the world. Well, Georgians are not very well known for that, but if we are about to look into that, even as a glimpse of an eye, then interconnectivity between the societies and having a multi-layered approach to our relationships could only serve the good cause. And I would only encourage for more development in that front. And very small note, I mean, frequently, I mean, now it happens so that when I visited not the political side of Turkey, but then think tankers side of the Turkey for the last year, there's a very limited circle of experts that are actually not only Georgia, but then Caucasus watchers. And then as much as we could encourage enlargement of that, more interest and then development at that level, and then we have two the best representatives of those circles here already in Baku at this event, it would be very beneficial. So I'll still end up on a very positive note. I believe in this relationship. I believe in the fundamentals of the strategic importance of this relationship for our countries, and we just have a very good startup potential, challenges, but then I think we have all the means to cope with those challenges if we act together in a very coordinated way. Thank you.